All right, it is 7 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get started here. And let's get back to the right slide here. We'll start out on this slide. I've been showing this slide every week for the last few weeks. I just want to make sure that everybody knows the opportunities you have for learning if you want to grow your own food. I have a lot of resources for you to be able to do that. On the bottom of the screen there, you can see my website, www.georgicrevolution.com. You can go to that and you can learn about what I have for the opportunities to learn how to grow your own food. So tonight is going to be a pretty exciting class. We are going to look at some of the permaculture ideas and why they are important to soil health. So let's go ahead and go to that. Okay, so I just grabbed this picture off the internet. And if you look up anything to do with permaculture, this is all over the internet. It's a pretty famous picture. But it talks about the 7 layers of the forest. And this is talking about creating food forests, where you have a big jungle on your property, and you create every plant layer to make food. And so that is kind of the goal. But your big giant trees would be nut type trees, your smaller trees would be fruit trees, and then you'd have other plants that would be creating berries and other types of food that are more of the shrub size. And then there's the smaller plants that would be more like vegetables. And then you would have root crops that you would eat. And then you have ground covers, things like strawberries or other edible herbs that would be covering the ground. And then you have the vine layer, which are things like grapes that would grow up the trunks of trees. So this is a common thing that's talked about in the permaculture world. And there are parts of permaculture that I absolutely love, and this is one of them, because the diversity that happens in a food forest is a fantastic, it has fantastic ramifications for so many other things besides creating food. It can really be a huge benefit to soil health if a person had their yard, even a greenhouse, that used these types of design structures within your food growing system. Instead of just a traditional garden where you have, 8 or 10 rows of a few vegetables and you call that your food production. If you put all 7 of these layers in there, this maximizes your space. So I really like this. This is good. What the Permaculture Institute has done with these trainings has been really fantastic. Here's just a quick list of benefits of having all 7 layers. You're going to have a gigantic diversity of species, and you will have a diversity of all kinds of foods to eat. And this is going to maximize your space, and it maximizes the 4 ecosystem processes, and it also helps you with pest control, disease control, any of those types of problems that you may have in your food production system on your land. You're going to have really great benefits because you will have such diversity with all of these different kinds of plants that it kind of maximizes everything that we've ever talked about that is a good thing that you want. If we look back at this chart, I've showed this chart on many classes that we've been doing, and this just reminds us of the 4 ecological processes and the 7 layers of a food forest, or just any forest. You could go into nature and maybe there's not a lot of food being produced in a specific forest, but where you find a forest where all 7 of those layers are there, you will find an ecosystem that is being maximized on the sun's energy flow, and on the water cycle will be functioning, the mineral cycle will be functioning, and your ecological succession generally is in a late succession because you have trees in the system. You're going to go underground and look at the soil, the microbes in the soil. You're going to have all of the mineralizers working. The fungus, the protozoa will be, they're going to be decomposing and making that the nitrogen cycle work. Your nematodes are going to be working, getting your ammonia going so that your trees and your shrubs are being well fed. Obviously, bacteria is there. Bacteria is everywhere, unless you have some kind of a contaminant that's killed and sterilized the soil. You will always have bacteria, but you're going to be maximizing that mineral cycle, and you will be producing a lot of calories per square foot. So what we find is that if you take out one of those layers, let's say we take out the we could pick any layer. Let's just say the herbaceous layer. If you remove that, then you are not collecting as many photons from the sun. The same amount of sunlight comes through the atmosphere and will hit an acre of ground every day. So you get, on one particular day, you have the same amount of light coming down. The question is, how much light are we harvesting? So if all you have is a bare field that has been tilled up, you will be harvesting 0 photons. You are not harvesting any sunlight at all. If you have a clean, bare, tilled field, you will have harvested nothing from the sun. And when we harvest something from the sun, from a leaf, and it always has to go through a leaf, a blade of grass, a leaf on a tree, a leaf on a Swiss chard plant, whatever it is, that plant will take those photons and it creates nutrients, and it will feed microbes, it will feed animals, it will feed all living things come from plants. So the sun feeds the plants feed all the other living things. This is how it works. And then you got your higher predators that are eating, they're the meat eaters, they're eating meat, whether they're birds of prey or wolves or whatever. They are just as reliant on this energy flow. So imagine if we plowed the entire earth and there was no living plant left, everything on earth would die. Which is an absurd statement for me to say, because nobody ever plows the entire earth. But think of that, just think of that, it would be like the Mars. Mars has no living plant. It becomes very hot. You're gonna burn your feet if you're walking on Mars, and your head's gonna freeze to death because you'll be way below 0. So at least that's what we think, because that's what the scientists have told us, and maybe they lied. But what we do know in our own food production system is that when we have the 7 layers of plants in our system, we are maximizing that sunlight, because every plant type is growing in that system, and so it's going to maximize the sunlight we can capture. If you only have a lawn on your ground, you won't capture as much sunlight on your acre of land. Let's just say you have a lawn on 1 acre. So if you had 5 trees, big giant trees, you still basically have the same amount of lawn. I mean, you took out a little bit for where the trunk is, but then you have a giant canopy of leaves up above that are collecting the sunlight also. So why does this matter? It matters because the plants' leaves, they collect carbon from the atmosphere, and then they put that into the soil, and the soil holds that carbon, and that carbon becomes the fertilizer for the next crop we're going to grow. And so we can grow our own fertilizer by focusing on the energy flow that's coming. And so when we have all 7 layers of these guys. You got your big trees, your little trees, your shrubs, your vines, your vegetative guys, your the ground covers, and then the roots. When you have all of those that are thriving and growing, what you've done is you have maximized the amount of sunlight you're getting, which means you have the maximum amount of fertilizer going into your ground without purchasing anything. It's all free. We just have to encourage those types of plants to grow. I just wanted to point this out, I think. Let's just go back here and look and see. So the diversity of food, it creates a diversity of food for people and a diversity of food for all kinds of wildlife. So that makes your community dynamics of the entire environment maximized, because you're creating food for all kinds of insects and all kinds of other animals. The more life you can incorporate into your land, the healthier your land is going to be. You will find that your pest and disease problems start going away when you have a bigger diversity. So the old way of thinking of pest and disease control was, what am I going to kill today? We're going to go out there and we're going to kill something. Something needs to die. The new way of thinking is, what can I add today? What can I attract to my farm today? What new life can I bring into my farm? And then we don't have to buy stuff. And this makes farmers profitable. Okay. Let's go ahead and open this up to questions. If you want to talk about this more, we certainly can. This was just a very simple overview of the 7 layers of a food forest and how soil health kind of fits into this. So let's open it up. Go ahead and unmute yourself and start talking to me.
Well, I have a question. When we're talking about farming and such, what do you think, keeping in mind the stuff like the food forest and all this kind of holistic methodology, what do you think the most effective scale is? Like, would the bigger be better, as big as you can reasonably manage, or is there a smaller amount that's more effective? What are your thoughts on scale? If you were gonna make the ideal, most holistically possible thing, best for the land, I don't know. What are your thoughts on scale?
Totally depends on what you're trying to do. If you're a mom with 5 kids and your husband's working all the time and you just want to grow really great food and have a good experience for your kids, raising your kids, then you have a greenhouse and, let's say, a half-acre land and a big garden outside and a couple of fruit trees, then you probably are going to work on your half-acre of land, and that's your scale. So it all comes back to context. If you're a rancher who manages 20,000 acres of land, then you probably want to focus on 20,000 acres. And maybe depending on what your end goal is, you may want to start with 10 acres first and see what's working in your environment, and then scale that up to your 20,000, because it needs to make sense on how you do it. But your entire goal of what you're trying to accomplish, that's going to be very different for every person you talk to. If you have somebody who's very concerned about the environment and climate change and a lot of those issues that we're hearing about today, that are pretty common things to be discussed in certain circles, then they're going to have a very different context of what they are trying to do than somebody who is trying to grow potatoes and just sell them on the open market. So so my question for you, Ezekiel, is, do you have a specific context that you're thinking of, And then we can discuss this further. It's a great question. It's good discussion. But what is your context personally?
Well, at the moment, I don't have any land toward to speak of. I work other people's land for them. Um, but I'm just thinking about, most of my goals revolve around producing food for larger groups of people. And so I'm just wondering if there's a point at which you reach like the point of less returns, where
Yeah,
a
right.
single person can't really do it, or maybe because you start spanning multiple biospheres or something like that. And again, obviously certain areas have longer, easier biospheres. But like I'm thinking of eventually operating in the northern Nevada area, a hog operation, and I'd like to be able to have some woodland type thing, try and get some scrub oak to take over, put down acorns and stuff. And I'm just wondering if there's a ideal size that one should aim for when doing this.
Yeah, so I again, back to context, I don't really think size would matter. I think you're going to have a lot of great benefits. If I mean, how big is one big giant tree, and is one tree going to impact a tiny micro ecosystem? Not really. So if you're overstory tree, if you only have room for one of them, I mean, it might be a fun project, but you would probably need 4, 5, 6 acres on the minimum side to make these 7 layers work, because you would want a little minute forest to make it actually start to work. So I would say, maybe less than 1 acre in some areas might work, but I would say closer to 5 to 10 acres being the very smallest to really see an impact and to change the ecosystem. Some of the best scientists out there today, the things they're publishing are saying that we can make it rain by having a forest. So if we planted a forest and got it up and mature, it would increase the local rains in that local rain cycle, which is true. This has been shown to be effective, but the smallest amount of land they need for that is 10,000 acres. So it would need to be a 10,000 acre farm, or just a piece of land to actually impact the water cycle to see a difference in the rainfall. So so that's something that's been published in recent years, showing that they think that 10,000 acres of forest is the minimum amount you would need to create that. So anyway, but here again, it's back to context. Context is everything. We've really got to understand what a person's context is. And I think a person's personal, your personal, what you need as a human being, and your family, your close community, those things come first. You need to be able to understand that context before you know what to do with your land. Um, because if you just go out there and you start doing stuff with the land, if it's not fulfilling you as a person, you're not going to keep doing it. People are going to get tired of it. I mean, we've seen that over thousands of times, over and over, in all kinds of things in life. Okay, I have a question or comment here from Helena. I can see this way of growing food being a late succession method, at least eventually. Would it be possible to grow early succession foods in the same forest? How would you make that work? Okay, so that is a fantastic question. Yeah, so if you wanted the early succession plants, you would want those to be on the outskirts, the sides. Let's just say you had an acre of land and you put half an acre on one side, you could put it into trees. Your other half an acre would be more open land, more sunshine, less shade, and you would just have to create the conditions so that the early succession plants would grow out there where they're not under the trees. But your mid succession would grow close to the trees, and then your late succession things would grow inside the trees. A lot of the permaculture people who are talking about this, they're very much in the mindset of uh, climate change, global warming. The earth has 60 harvests left before humans die. Humans could be dead in as soon as 12 years. These are the types of things that we hear from a lot of the permaculture people, and those are the things that are motivating them to do this type of work. I don't exactly agree with a lot of the things that they say about that. It seems like it's based on a lot of fear, and I choose to live a different way. But when it comes to why they're doing this, those are a lot of their motivating factors, which is kind of telling because they're putting together these food forests, and a lot of people are putting them together in tropical and subtropical places where they have a lot of fantastic fruits and vegetables and root crops that are growing year round, and they can harvest things out there 12 months a year. People who are living there's a a good solid winter and a dormant season, we have a different way of growing food where we're growing things in the growing season and we're storing through in our root cellars, and we're dehydrating and canning and freezing foods. And so there's a different way of doing it. But I do see a lot of the permaculture people doing their permaculture things in the tropics and subtropics where they have that continual fruit supply throughout the year, which is awesome. I'm glad they're doing it, but here again, it comes back to context. It's not exactly the best thing, the best way to choose. In other words, you wouldn't necessarily choose the 7-layer food forest in a place where the whole thing's going to be dormant throughout the year, and then there's a bunch of foods you can't grow because during the growing season it's shaded out. So you wouldn't want to put up so many shade trees that you can't grow, your brassicas and a lot of your more early succession crops. Or if you wanted to grow a nice field of potatoes and carrots and dig them up, a lot of times there's a scale of efficiency that you need to think about. And as far as Ezekiel was talking, saying he wants to grow food for people. If you wanted to grow, 5 acres of carrots, which would be a lot of carrots, but you could feed a lot of people. And people need to be fed. It's a viable way to make a living. It's growing food. So we have to focus on a scale of efficiency that absolutely works. And so would you take your entire acreage and make a food forest? No, I wouldn't recommend that. But are there benefits to it? Absolutely. So we have to look at context and see where this would fit in and where it doesn't fit in. Because sometimes it would fit in fantastic and sometimes it doesn't. In my greenhouse, it's really fun to see where we could be putting some fruit trees in there and having the opportunity for a fruit tree to be growing up and taking up the space in the high ceiling in the center. And then we could be growing grapevines on it. Maybe some kiwis and just other vining type fruits that would grow in there throughout the year. That would be a fun thing to do. Instead of keeping all of our plants within the first couple of feet, let's use that light coming through up, 10, 15 feet high inside that greenhouse space. Okay, do we have any more questions?
Do you think that there's any particular crops that are like common or that we consider staples that would be less common or less like a staple if the whole world kind of adopted the holistic gardening method? Like I've heard some talks of how grains would become less predominant, but I'm curious on your thoughts on how that might change.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I've not really thought too much about that. Uh, grains is what makes civilization a civilization because we 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 eat grain There's so many things, so many food products that are grains that, uh, I mean, that's what created civilization in the first place. Without grains, we either starve to death in the winter or we live in the tropics. So that's an interesting thought. I don't know. I certainly wouldn't want to say that that's a good way to go. I don't think it is a good direction to move toward. I let's keep the crops we have. Let's keep all of them. Let's just grow them in a way that maximizes the photons coming from the sun, so that farmers are profitable again. Let's stop spending so much money on fertilizer that we go out of business on our farms because we can't afford it. That doesn't make sense. And then we're subsidized by the taxpayers through the farm bill. Farms are a business. We need to treat them like that. They need to make money. They need to be profitable. Just because we're producing food doesn't make it okay to have to be subsidized by a taxpayer. That doesn't make sense. You know, uh, we need to do other methods, and we know what the methods are. It's not like, oh, we don't know what to do. We certainly know what to do. We grow the cover crops. We roll them down. We have, instead of having bare ground, there's a lot of wheat country. In the last couple hundred years of agriculture, there's been a lot of wheat country that would be like 15 months that was just bare soil because they would fallow it for a year, and then they'd grow that crop of wheat, and then it's another year and a half of, or 2 years or whatever, of fallow. And all that fallowing, which means you're not growing the crop, you're just harrowing or tilling the soil so that the weeds don't grow. And that's the worst thing that we can do for the soil health. It kills the soil. So yeah. So Helena says, which layer would grains be? Can you grow them in good in a forest? You probably cannot grow grain in a forest. Grains are an annual, which means they are on the early succession side of things, and they probably are not growing. Let me refer to my chart real quick here. So grains, yeah, corn, wheat, barley, etc. It has a fungal to bacterial ratio of 1. So yeah, so it's grains would basically be a mid-succession crop. Not really. So you'd want some fungus in the soil mineralizing, and you want about the same amount of bacteria in the soil mineralizing to grow the common grains. So yeah, it's not a late succession, it's not an early succession. You certainly wouldn't want to grow them in the shade. So under the canopy, it would not work very good. They need to be in an open field. So here again, context. Grains are a good thing. They're absolutely a great thing. And are they overused? Well, sure they are. Are people having problems with, gluten problems from grains? Well, sure they are. That's not just a bunch of hypochondriacs. There are real issues with some of those things. It's because we are using too much. There's a great thing called, what is it called? Oh, I was going to say a saying. I can't think of it. Moderation in all things. That's what I was trying to think of. Moderation in all things is very, very important. We need to have moderation. So we don't eat grains all the time, but grains are wonderful, especially because the earth goes through cycles. Governments go through cycles. Politics go through cycles. Human life goes through cycles. And there are certain cycles when life gets bad for a decade. And there's famines. Famines are real. Famines have been a part of human life since humans existed. And if you have some grains stored, they will get you through a famine. You know, I mean, several bags of potatoes will get you through a winter. There are certain things that we need to have and keep. So, yeah. Okay. Any other questions or comments? I have a question for Ezekiel. How was your garden this year?
My garden was good. I was focusing more on building the soil health for next year than on big harvests. So I wouldn't say that I had really high yields, but I definitely did good at getting my soil health up to the point where it killed all of my brassicas because my fungus got so good. Um, and then
Yeah.
my tomatoes decided they didn't like where they were planted, so they all fell over on my brassicas and then started to become a weed in my brassicas, and they took off, and that was a lot of fun. Um,
So it
right
was
now,
your garden was turning into a jungle, is what you're saying.
yes, very
Well, that's
much.
good. Yeah, that's good. See, it's funny for people who are not up on the, you know, they're not up on this information. They would hear you say you're focusing on soil health and it got so good that it killed my brassicas. That doesn't sound like a good thing. Too much fungus in the soil. That sounds like a bad thing. We need a fungicide. That's what we think from the old time, the old type of thinking. But we need to come up to the new type of thinking. So that's good stuff, Ezekiel. Thanks for sharing. Okay, I think we're going to call it tonight. If you have any more questions, we can go ahead and take them. But if not, we're going to close this down. Thanks for being here. Hopefully, this was good information to help you have the best garden ever. One last chance for a question. Go ahead and ask. Okay, sounds like we are done. We will be back here next Thursday. Same time, same place, different subject.